Part 1. This is a story from my high school days. During the summer vacation of my second year in high school, I went on a training camp with my club to a lodge deep in the mountains of a certain prefecture. The location was pretty nice. There were only a few tourist hotels and a convenience store about 500 to 700 meters away, but other than that, there was nothing around. Still, I remember how excited we were, goofing around and having fun. That night, we got bored and decided to go on a supply run to the convenience store with our coach's permission. About 10 of us set out, chatting and laughing as we walked. Since we hadn't explored that side of the area during the day, we hadn't noticed before, but we realized there was a house-like building behind the lodge. The building was dark, with no lights on. It looked like either an abandoned house or a private residence, maybe a vacation home of some sort. One of my friends, feeling adventurous, said, "Wanna go check it out later?" But we knew if we stayed out too late, our coach would scold us. So, we decided to finish our shopping first and then discuss whether to explore it back at the lodge. Part 2. On our way back to the lodge after shopping at the convenience store, one of the younger students suddenly said something strange. He claimed that the front door of that house had been slightly open and that a child had been peeking out at us from inside. We laughed it off, teasing him, saying, "There's no way we're falling for such a cliché trick." But he insisted with a serious face, "I swear I saw it." That made us a little uneasy, so we went back to a spot where we could see the house. However, the door was shut tight, and there was no sign of anyone there. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. We continued teasing him as we made our way back to the lodge. Once we got back, we went up to the second-floor hallway, where we had a partial view of the house through the gaps between the trees. As I chatted with a friend, pointing at the building, saying, "That's the one, right?" We both saw it. The door was slightly ajar, and a dark figure, likely a child, was peeking out with just its head visible. "Huh?" My friend and I saw it at the same time and froze in silence. The first one to speak was my friend. "Hey! Is that?" He was visibly shaken. I wasn't exactly scared at that moment, more like my mind had gone blank from the sheer suddenness of it. "The kid. It's looking at us, right?" I muttered. At that moment, laughter echoed from one of the rooms behind us. Startled, we snapped out of our trance. "This is seriously messed up, right?" "We both saw that clearly," I said, and my friend, still rattled, blurted out, "I'm gonna grab my phone and take a picture." He ran off to his room. By then, the commotion had drawn attention. The lodge housed around 60 students, including some from another school, and about half of them, around 30 people, had now gathered in the hallway to see what was going on. The childlike figure was still there, peeking out from the doorway with just its head, staring up at us. The hallway was in an uproar. Eventually, even the supervising teachers came over to see what all the fuss was about. As my friend and I were explaining, some students watching through the window suddenly gasped, and we heard the faint but unmistakable sound of a door softly clicking shut. By the time the teachers looked out, the door was closed, and there was no sign of anyone. All that remained was the dark, unlit house standing eerily still among the trees. Of course, the teachers didn't believe us. However, two of the younger teachers, who were more easygoing, agreed to check it out. We watched from the window as they walked around to the back of the lodge with flashlights, stopping at the front of the house. They tried the door, seemingly checking if it would open, but it wouldn't budge. They also called out, "Is anyone there?" but got no response. After about 5 minutes, they returned. A few students had managed to snap photos on their phones, but the low-quality cameras of the time only produced pitch-black images, making them useless as evidence. In the end, we got scolded by the teachers and were ordered to go to bed. We reluctantly returned to our assigned rooms. Part 3. That night, unable to sleep due to the lingering unease, we debated whether we should go check out the house now or wait until daylight. As we were talking, there was a sudden bang, bang, on our window. We could see shadows outside. Already spooked by what had happened earlier, we froze. Then a voice called from outside, "Hey! Let us in." We hesitantly pulled back the curtain, revealing 5 students from another school whom we had befriended earlier that day. Apparently, they had climbed along a narrow 20 centimeters wide ledge outside the building to reach our window. After letting them in, they explained that they had been having the exact same conversation as us, whether to check out the house at night or in the morning. They had already made up their minds and had come to invite us along. With that, we decided to go on what was essentially a test of courage. Our team consisted of, from our school, me, Aya, and Bita; from the other school, Chihiro, Diko, and Isuke. The rest of the students made various excuses and ultimately refused to join. The 6 of us carefully made our way outside through the window, traversing the ledge to avoid being spotted by the teachers. We then circled around through the road to reach the house. As a precaution, some of the students who stayed behind in the lodge were stationed at the second-floor hallway with flashlights. If anything seemed wrong, they were supposed to signal us with their lights. When we arrived in front of the house, it was undeniably eerie. From a distance, we hadn't noticed, but the walls were covered in moss, and ivy vines crawled up all over the structure. The windows visible from the outside had wooden planks nailed over them, suggesting that the house had been abandoned for a long time. Chihiro, Aya, and Bita went to check the perimeter while I absent-mindedly turned the doorknob. I didn't expect anything to happen, until the door unexpectedly swung open with ease. I immediately called the others back, and we stepped inside. The moment we entered, the air was thick with humidity, likely due to the summer heat. A musty, moldy smell filled the room. We started exploring. The house was dusty and smelled of mildew, but there were no signs of vandalism. It was eerily intact. With no furniture in sight, the empty rooms felt oddly spacious. As we moved through the first floor, Isuke suddenly said, "Do you guys hear laughter coming from upstairs?" We all froze and strained our ears, but none of us could hear anything. "Must be your imagination," I said, but Isuke seemed insistent. "No, I swear I heard it. I want to check it out." Since we hadn't finished exploring the first floor yet, we split into 2 groups. My schoolmates and I, Aya, Bita, would continue searching the first floor. Chihiro, Deko, and Isuke would investigate the second floor. We agreed to meet at the stairs if anything happened. Moments later, the silence was shattered by an ear-splitting, almost joyous laughter. Ha 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 ha. Then, almost immediately after, we heard the panicked shots of Chihiro and Deko. "Isuke? What the hell is wrong with you? Hey!" Alarmed, we bolted up the stairs and found them in the last room at the end of the hallway. Isuke was standing by the window, his face completely blank, but he was laughing hysterically. Ha 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 ha. Chihiro and Deko were desperately shaking him and slapping his face, their own faces pale with fear. I rushed in and got a good look at Isuke's face. That was the moment I realized just how serious this situation was. His mouth was wide open in laughter, yet his face showed no expression at all. His eyes were blank, and tears streamed down his face in large drops. A sharp smell hit me. It was urine. He had wet himself. Isuke kept laughing, tears pouring down his face, as if he couldn't see or hear us at all. We were panicking, trying to snap him out of it. The only one who remained somewhat calm was Bita, who said, "We can't leave him like this. Let's get him back to the lodge." We each grabbed his arms and legs and carried him down the stairs. That's when we ran into a problem. Bita, who had reached the front door first, grabbed the handle and twisted it. His voice trembled as he yelled, "The door won't open." We set Isuke down in the hallway and all tried the door, but it wouldn't budge. Earlier, it had opened effortlessly, so why now? Aya, the strongest among us, threw his entire weight against the door, slamming his shoulder into it. Nothing. We were starting to panic, exchanging nervous glances, when suddenly, from the second floor, we heard it. Ho ho ho. Ho ho ho. Ho ho ho. The sound was unnatural, mechanical, completely devoid of emotion. Isuke, still lying on the floor, kept laughing uncontrollably. We had to get out. I remembered that the living room had large glass sliding doors. If we couldn't escape through the front, maybe we could break those. I quickly relayed my plan, and we started moving toward the living room. Then I made the mistake of looking up the stairs. I froze. Peeking down from the landing above was a child's face. The moonlight cast a backlight, making their features hard to see, but I recognized the size and shape of the head. It was the same child from before. Ho ho ho. Ho ho ho. Ho ho ho. The sound was coming from them. Something was wrong. I felt an intense sense of unease as I stared. Then, suddenly, I realized what was bothering me. Only the head was visible. If they were leaning over the railing that much, at least their shoulders should have been visible. But there was nothing. Just a floating head. My breath caught in my throat. Chihiro grabbed my arm and yanked me away. "What the hell are you doing? We need to get out of here now." To me, it felt like mere seconds, but apparently, while I was frozen in place, the others had managed to break the window boards, shatter the glass, and pull Isuke into the living room. I snapped out of it and hurried after them. Even after we stepped outside, that voice still echoed from the house. Ho ho ho. Ho ho ho. Ho ho ho. We ran. Deeko sprinted ahead to get help from the teachers. By the time we reached the lodge, Isuke was still laughing, but he had gone completely limp. The teachers were furious. We were scolded relentlessly, and the rest of the training camp was immediately cancelled. Later that day, an ambulance arrived to take Isuke away. The next morning, as we were packing up to leave, something else happened. About 10 cars pulled up to the lodge. Around 20 older men stepped out, along with members of what looked like the local volunteer fire department. They spoke briefly with our supervising teachers before heading straight to the house. Then they started sealing it off. They put up ropes around it, hammered in wooden stakes, and started constructing some kind of fence. We had no idea what was going on. When we asked our teachers, they refused to tell us anything. We boarded the bus and returned home. Isuke was hospitalized for 2 days before being transferred somewhere else. 4 days later, he returned to school as if nothing had happened. When we asked him about it, he said he didn't remember anything from the moment we entered the house until he woke up in the hospital. Part 4. Around noon, while we were getting ready to leave, about 10 cars pulled up at the training camp lodge. From them emerged around 20 older men, some middle-aged, some elderly, as well as what seemed to be members of the local fire brigade. They had a brief conversation with our supervising teachers before heading behind the lodge, where they started roping off the house and setting up some kind of fence or barrier around it. We asked what was going on, but the teachers refused to tell us anything. Shortly after, we boarded the bus and returned home. Isuke spent 2 days in the hospital before being transferred somewhere else. 4 days later, he came back as if nothing had happened. When we asked him about it, he told us that he had no memory at all from the moment we entered the house until the previous day. That night, the day Isuke returned, I was lying in my room, texting on my phone. Then, for just a moment, I thought I heard it. Ho ho ho. Ho ho ho. Ho ho ho. I sat up in shock. Throwing open my curtains, I looked outside. Nothing. The same old familiar view. Maybe I imagined it? Since I was already up, I decided to go downstairs to get a drink. My house was L-shaped, and my room was built above the garage. I grabbed a bottle of tea from the fridge and started heading back upstairs. That's when I saw it. Through the small gap in the staircase curtain, I could just barely see part of the roof outside my window. And there was something sitting on it. After everything that had happened, my blood ran cold. Slowly, cautiously, I peeled the curtain aside to get a better look. There, kneeling neatly with hands resting on its lap, was a child dressed in traditional Japanese clothing. That alone would have been eerie enough. But then I noticed. The child was leaning forward, peering down as if trying to look inside my room. And from where its neck should have been, a long, thin, straight pole-like structure extended about a meter forward. At the very end of that pole was its head, positioned right against my bedroom window, peering inside. Through the glass, I could hear it again. Ho ho ho. Ho ho ho. Ho ho ho. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. Then, as if my body finally understood the danger, I stumbled backward, heart pounding, and ran downstairs. I considered waking my parents, but what if I woke them up, only for it to be gone? Wouldn't that be even worse? For some reason, that thought terrified me even more. So instead, I spent the entire night wide awake in the living room. I think I could still hear it, softly, faintly, until around 4 a.m. The next morning, I cautiously returned to my room. It was gone. Nothing seemed out of place. Relieved, I told myself it was over, until the phone rang that afternoon. It was our supervising teacher. Come to school immediately. We need to talk. A sinking feeling gripped my stomach. I hurried out the door. When I arrived at school, I was led into the student council meeting room. Inside were Aya, Bita, Chihiro, and Deeko. Also present were both our supervising teachers and some unfamiliar older men. One of the teachers spoke first. Isuke had another episode. He had been taken to the same place as before. Then the teacher turned to us. Did anything strange happen to any of you last night? My breath caught. I swallowed and hesitantly answered. Something weird was watching me through my window last night. The room fell silent. The others looked confused. Aya, Bita, Chihiro, and Deeko all shook their heads. Nothing happened to us. Then, Chihiro suddenly turned to me. Wait. Back at the house, you stood there staring at the staircase for a long time, right? Maybe that has something to do with it? I froze. I had almost forgotten. The child, or whatever it was, at the top of the stairs. I hesitated, then asked the group. You all heard the laughing, right? And saw the child? They exchanged glances. Finally, Beta spoke. We all heard the laughing. But none of us saw a child inside the house. A chill ran down my spine. I had been the only one who saw it. Up until now, the older men in the room had been silent. But now, one of them spoke. He told us everything. What we had encountered was something called a Hyos. A local spirit, a yokai unique to that region. Hyos were rarely seen, but they would sometimes appear on the rooftops of pregnant women or infertile couples, laughing. When this happened, the pregnant women would give birth safely, and the infertile couples would conceive. In other words, they were supposed to bring good fortune. However, once every few decades, for reasons unknown, a Hyos would turn violent, and when it did, it possessed children and killed them. That house, the old abandoned building, had no particular history of tragedy or misfortune. It was just a place where a Hyos happened to appear. And when a Hyos began to target a child, there was only one way to stop it. The place where it first appeared had to be sealed off. A sacred barrier had to be erected, and a small shrine had to be built to contain it. That was what the local men had been doing the day we left, trapping the Hyos inside a ritual seal. But then the older man frowned. Something isn't right this time. A Hyos should not be able to escape once sealed. Yet, this one had. Not only had it attacked Isuke again, but now it had appeared at my house. It was also unheard of for a Hyos to leave its own region. And the last recorded case of one possessing a child had been 20 years ago, far too soon for it to happen again. We don't know why this is happening. But what was done was done. All we could do now was try to protect ourselves. The local monks were called in. At the school, they performed a purification ritual and gave each of us protective charms. You should be fine now, they told us. As for Isuke, he would remain under the temple's care while the shrine was rebuilt and the Hyos was properly enshrined. After we were dismissed, our parents arrived to pick us up. But before leaving, we gathered one last time. In the end, we all decided to stay at my house for the night. Even though the monks said we were safe, none of us felt comfortable being alone. We needed to stick together. Part 5. That night, as we were playing video games in my room, a rhythmic knock, 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 knock sounded against the window. As I had explained before, my room was above the garage, and the exterior wall was nearly vertical. There was no way someone could climb up and knock on the window. And worst of all, it was the same window where I had seen the child staring in the night before. The moment we realized that, the room fell into an uneasy silence. Beta, trying to act tough, scoffed, "Come on, it's gotta be some prank or just the wind, right?" Then, before anyone could stop him, he reached for the curtain. I panicked and grabbed his arm, stopping him before he could pull it open. The knocking continued. Deco, pale-faced, muttered, "Shouldn't we just check what it is? Not knowing might be even worse." He had a point. We couldn't just sit here all night listening to something unknown knocking at my window. We needed to see it, to know what we were dealing with. So we moved away from the window, towards the stairs, where we had a better angle to peek at my room from a safe distance. Carefully, we pulled the curtain just a little, leaving only a small gap to look through. And then, there it was. The same thing from last night. The child was once again extending its impossibly long neck, peering into my room through the window. But now, we could see what it was doing. It was knocking. Slowly, methodically, it was tapping its head against the glass. Knock. 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 And with each knock, the laughter followed. Ho ho ho. Ho ho ho. Ho ho ho. It was a deeply unnatural sight. And then I noticed something else. It wasn't a child at all. It was a doll. A Japanese-style doll, dressed in a kimono. Its head knocked against the window not like flesh and bone, but like something hollow, like a porcelain mannequin. Chihiro whispered, voice trembling, "Wait, didn't they seal the Hyos again today? How the hell is it still here?" And then, from downstairs, "Hey, what are you guys doing up there?" My dad's voice. Startled, Aya flinched and accidentally bumped into the window. Thud. The thing's head twitched. And then, it turned toward us. We saw its face clearly. It was smiling. A pale, porcelain white doll's face. It had no pupils, just empty black sockets where its eyes should have been. Its mouth was a crescent-shaped hole, pitch black and gaping, like a cutout smile. And yet, despite its featureless black void of a face, its expression was unmistakable. It was grinning. My dad climbed the stairs. I said, "What are you doing?" He reached for the curtain and yanked it open. The thing vanished in an instant. Gone. It had darted back into the shadows of the rooftop, disappearing completely. But my dad had seen it. Even if only for a second, he had seen something. I could tell from the way his face drained of color. Without another word, he turned and rushed downstairs, immediately dialing someone on his phone. I overheard snippets. He was calling the monks and the men from the village. And then, the thing never appeared again that night. The next day. By morning, the monks and the village elders had arrived at my house. They said it was no longer safe for us to stay here. We were being taken to a temple near the training camp lodge. Our parents arrived, but the village chief, one of the older men, firmly told them, "It's too dangerous. You must not come." And so, only we, the students who had been involved, were taken away. At the temple, we arrived before noon. Isuke, dressed in a tracksuit, looking visibly exhausted, was waiting for us at the entrance. "Hey! You guys made it." He looked relieved. Inside the main hall, the monks and village elders sat us down. They needed details. Everything that had happened the night before. As we took turns explaining, we described the doll's face, its long neck, the knocking, the laughter. And then, one of the elders suddenly interrupted us. "Wait. A doll? A long neck? What the hell are you talking about?" His expression was one of genuine shock. We all fell silent. One of the monks, who had been listening carefully, exchanged uneasy glances with the elder. Then he muttered, "No. This isn't a high house. Something's wrong." They conferred with each other in hushed voices. Then, after a long pause, they turned back to us and said, "We made a mistake. This is not a high house. Whatever is following you, it's something else entirely." My stomach sank. What we thought was true wasn't. At first, when they had heard a childlike figure, laughter, a student behaving strangely, crying and laughing uncontrollably, it happening near the village, they had assumed it was a high house. But now, after hearing the detailed description of what we saw, it didn't match any known high house sightings. High house were free, monkey-like creatures, the size of a small child. They wore no clothing. They never had human features. They did not have long, extending necks. And their laughter was supposed to be animalistic, more like a monkey's shriek, not the mechanical, hollow sound we had heard. We had not been haunted by a high house. It was something else. A mistaken assumption, and a new problem. We sat there, stunned. We had believed that coming to the temple would fix everything. That the monks would know exactly what was happening and how to stop it. But instead, they were telling us they didn't know what we were dealing with. The air in the room grew heavy. No one spoke. Then finally, one of the monks said, "Regardless of what it is, there is definitely something unnatural here. I know a monk who specializes in these matters. He may be able to help. I will go and fetch him." With that, he left the temple, disappearing down the road in his car. We sat in numb silence. One of the village elders kept arguing on his phone, seemingly negotiating something. Part 6. By evening, the monk returned with another monk in tow. As soon as they stepped inside, the village chief, who had been on his phone earlier, rushed over to them, his face pale. "It's bad. We have a big problem." He explained that they had just found another child in the village suffering from the same symptoms as Isuke. That child was being brought here right now. The first monk turned to us and said, "We'll explain everything later. For now, just stay in the tatami room and wait." With that, the two monks hurried toward the main temple hall. The cursed child arrives. 15 minutes later, a van pulled into the temple grounds. From inside the vehicle, we could already hear that awful laughter. Ha 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 ha. The door opened, and several adults stepped out, carrying a middle school-aged boy. The boy was completely limp, his eyes unfocused, yet his mouth was wide open, laughing uncontrollably. Just like Isuke. They carried him straight into the main temple hall. For the next 10 minutes, we could hear the monks chanting prayers, their voices barely audible over the child's relentless manic laughter. Then, suddenly, the laughter stopped. The temple fell silent. The truth about the curse. 15 minutes later, the two monks returned to our room and began explaining what they had learned. The child was severely exhausted and was now sleeping on a futon in the temple. Based on the symptoms, the real cause of the affliction was not a ghost or a yokai, but a cursed object, a jujubutsu. The second monk, an expert in such matters, spoke next. He had no solid proof, but his instincts told him that we were cursed by an object, not a spirit. If that were true, then a purification ritual to sever our ties to the object might be enough to free us from the curse. However, the best course of action would be to retrieve the doll and exorcise it completely. It seemed like a clear solution, a way out. We all agreed immediately. Do it. If that's what it takes, just do it now. The unexpected incident. But before the ritual could begin, I realized something. I needed to use the bathroom. It turned out I wasn't the only one. One by one, everyone admitted they had been holding it in this whole time. And so, our entire group, 6 of us, left the room together to go to the restroom. It returns. On the way back, as we walked down the dimly lit corridor toward the main temple hall. A sound. Ho ho ho. Ho ho ho. Ho ho ho. That horrible, mechanical laughter. It was close. Chihiro whispered, "It's near, isn't it?" Aya nodded, his voice unsteady. "Way too close. This is bad." We all froze. The laughter was coming from somewhere nearby, but we couldn't see it. Then, from behind us, Isuke and Deko suddenly screamed. "Run! Get to the main hall. Now!" At the same time, they pointed toward the upper part of a nearby window. I turned. And there it was. Its head was sticking out from the temple's rooftop. Just floating there, grinning. That same, pale, doll-like face, with soulless black eyes and a gaping crescent-shaped mouth. Still smiling. And still laughing. Ho ho ho. Ho ho ho. Ho ho ho. We ran. We ran like hell. The final confrontation. We burst into the main hall, gasping for breath. The monks and the village chief were already waiting. Only now, I realized, the village chief was the head of this entire village. We explained what we had just seen. The monks wasted no time. They sat us down in a circle, told us not to move, and began chanting a powerful prayer. The knock at the door. The temple hall was eerily quiet, except for the monks' low, rhythmic chanting. Then, from above. Ho ho ho. Ho ho ho. Ho ho ho. And then. Knock. 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 That same hollow tapping sound. Just like when it had knocked on my bedroom window. We huddled together, trembling. The monks continued their prayers. The laughter faded for a moment. But then. It started again. This time, from the garden outside the temple. And then, we saw it. Projected onto the thin sliding paper doors of the hall. A shadow. The outline of the doll's head, swaying gently, illuminated by the fading sunlight. Still grinning. Still laughing. Ho ho ho. Ho ho ho. Ho ho ho. The breaking point. Something inside me snapped. Days of terror, sleeplessness, and anxiety had built up inside me. And now, staring at that mocking silhouette, something in my mind just broke. I wasn't scared anymore. I was furious. I grabbed a heavy iron candlestick holder, ignoring the monks' shouts of protest. I stormed toward the sliding door. I yanked it open. And there it was. The thing was dangling from the roof, its long, pole-like neck extending downward, face inches from mine. For a moment, I froze in terror. But then, rage took over. I swung the candlestick with all my strength. Fuck off. Crack. The heavy metal smashed into its face. The doll's head snapped back violently, and it fell. Crashing onto the temple courtyard. But it wasn't dead yet. It lay there, giggling eerily, its laughter now distorted. Ho 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 ho. Ho ho ho. Ho 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 ho. I jumped down barefoot, ignoring the burning pain as my feet hit the gravel. And then I started swinging. I kept hitting it. Over and over. Something was happening. A strange sensation crawled into my mind. My body felt wrong. I wanted to laugh. I wanted to cry. I couldn't stop. I later learned that I had been laughing and sobbing uncontrollably, just like Isuke. But I didn't stop. I kept swinging. Then. A horrible cracking sound. Something broke. And suddenly. It stopped laughing. The end of the nightmare. The laughter was gone. The monks chanted even louder. The others rushed forward, throwing sand over the now burning remains of the doll. It had stopped moving. For the first time in days. I felt peaceful. The monks decided to seal the remains and perform a final purification ritual the next day. And just like that, the nightmare was over. The next morning, we examined what was left of the doll. Burned into the torso, barely legible, was an inscription. Kanpo 2nd year, 1742. Another partially burned word could be made out. Uzadal. The monks had never heard of it. To this day, we never received an answer.